Ladies and gentlemen, we are continuing our fascinating conversation with Hedieh Mirahmadi, who served in counterterrorism in the United States government over 20 years. She served with 5 presidents. It's at very high levels. And if you hadn't listened to our first conversation that was posted last Friday, you need to go back and listen to that, because we're going to pick up the conversation right where we left off. Hedieh, as you may remember, grew up in a secular home, but in a Muslim heritage home, and became a Muslim. She's now a Christian. She heads resurrectministry.com. She's also an attorney. And we had a great conversation about so many things, about Islam, about the West, about counterterrorism. And we're just picking up our conversation where we left off. Hedieh, we were talking just before we left about the government and the fact that it seems that the United States government, flipped in its concern over from Islamic terrorism to what they call domestic terrorism. The fact that they think their conservatives are somehow a threat, including school moms that want their curriculum to be free of pornographic messages. What do you think prompted that? Was it just some kind of disdain for Donald Trump when he was elected in 2016 and took over in 2017?
I think it's not just disdain for him as a leader. It's a disdain for the populist movement. So similarly to what you're seeing in Europe, it's a disdain for the majority culture, which is a Judeo-Christian culture. It's the white culture. And it's a disdain for everything that represents, the conservative values. I mean, think about all that's at stake at this election. Disinformation, censorship of our First Amendment freedoms, castration of our children, the killing of babies, the rising inflation costs, the extreme debt crisis. All
the open
of these
border
things,
is the biggest issue.
Open border.
Many, yeah.
Increasing crime, all these things jeopardize our standing in the world and our standing as a nation. With this open border and the mass migration, it's basically diluting the influence of this population, the heritage, the foundation of this country. And that's ultimately, I mean, to me, I know I probably have family members, Muslim family members, that are laughing at this, because this is exactly what Islam intended when it came to the West, which was, we will overtake you by the destruction of your own society. You will self-destruct because you lack morality, you lack principles. And I really think this is the battle for Christians to lose. It's our problem that this is happening.
Yeah, I always hear pastors saying, I just preach the gospel. I don't get involved in politics. And I always say to them, if you don't think politics are important, you don't think the gospel's important. I mean, if you don't think so, try and start a church in North Korea. Exactly. Try and start a church in Iran, a legal church. You can't. They don't allow it. Okay. So your ability to preach and live the gospel is partially dependent on the laws that are made in Washington, the laws that are made in your state and local jurisdictions. In fact, politics affects. What's that?
And those laws are at stake.
Yeah, they are at stake. Now, I got to admit that obviously, I don't think an open border is a good idea. Everyone believes in borders, ladies and gentlemen. You have a lock on your door, right? Because you just can't let anybody come into your house. You couldn't take everybody in your house. You need to vet people coming into your house. You don't have resources to bring everybody in your house. And we don't have resources for everyone to come to the United States either. We're only 4% of the population, the world population, ladies and gentlemen. So on one hand, I'm torn, Hedieh. Let me mention why. Because I want people to have the opportunities we have here in America, and I want people to come here and meet Jesus. But on the other hand, there's no possible way that we can bring everyone here. We can only take a limited number of people. Also, and I want your insight on this, there are people groups that are very resistant to being assimilated into the culture of America. I've heard you say, for example, up in Minnesota, where you have the Somali area, they were all put there and they're not becoming Americans. They're not learning the language. They're staying Muslims. So some of those folks there want to overturn our freedoms. They want to take away the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech. They want to implement Sharia law. They want to stop our freedom to preach and live the gospel. So what are we supposed to do? What's the right balance with regard to all this?
It's interesting because I was listening to a Polish parliamentarian, Dominik Tarczynski, talk about how he refused to take not even a single Muslim immigrant into Poland, that their percentage of Muslim population is 0.1%. And they have the lowest crime rate in all of Europe, and that he has that 70% of crime committed in Europe is committed by Muslims, and that's why his crime rate is so low, because he doesn't have Muslims, and how much criticism and attacks he's gotten. And so for me, it's very difficult coming from a Muslim family, and most of my immediate relatives are all Muslim, that to say that you can't let Muslims into America. But I just think that we could have standards. First of all, we need a proper closed border. We need people to be, interviewed and vetted. And if I'm not mistaken, when my parents came over, they had a test that they had to take. So they had to take an American history test. And so they had to know the fundamentals of American history before they got their papers. And so there is a process we have followed in the past that I think we could still safely and effectively include immigrants from other countries and continue to be the melting pot. But again, there's a big incentive of government corruption. There are, if I'm not mistaken, 7 or 8 resettlement agencies. These are multi-billion dollar large U.S. companies that are responsible for resettling migrants. They get paid per head.
Why? So why are we doing that? What's the point?
I don't know. And they put them all, so they get paid per head. They put them all in what's known as resettlement zones. Minnesota's a resettlement zone. Boulder, Colorado, where you're seeing the migrants and the gangs out there, that's also a resettlement zone. We put them in these zones where we know landlords and people that'll give them low-paying jobs, and we create ghettos of people. Same thing that's happening in Europe. And it's backed by the corruption from our own system that's feeding this. And we don't shut it down. And it just
is this new in the Biden-Harris administration?
No. We've been doing this for decades. I don't know when it started, but decades. Republican and Democrat. It doesn't change. Trump, for a time, tried to decrease the quota, and people went bananas. But he wasn't able to dismantle it altogether. He just decreased the quota.
Well, you see, again, friends, as we said in the last podcast, this is the disinformation that this is Islamophobia. No, Islam, again, is an ideology. It's not a race. There are people from all different races that are Muslims. We might have a reason to not want the extremist form of Islam in America. Number one, it's unconstitutional. Number two, it's dangerous if they want to commit jihad. And it seems to me to be just a lie of Satan, basically, to say that, oh, you must be a racist if you don't want more Muslims in America. What kind of Muslims do you want to bring? You want to bring in the Sufis? Bring them in. You are a Sufi, right? Sufis are the mystical ones, right? They're not going to hurt a fly. But and you're an example. Your parents came in. They were ostensibly Muslims. Yes. And you just adopted Islam as a young adult, and then later became a Christian, but you were never radicalized in any way. You were never someone who was in any way connected to jihad. So it seems to me
that's the hard part is how do you distinguish between the two, and how do you talk about limiting Muslims without sounding racist? I struggle with that myself. I don't know how to express it. Because what do? You have a religion test when they come in the border and ask them a couple questions about what they think of jihad. I don't even know if that'll be telling.
Right. You know, yeah. It's okay to lie to the infidel. Yeah. Yeah. If the FBI knows where they're coming from and what their history is, there may be ways of checking that out. There's got to be some way of discovering, not that you're going to catch everybody, but certainly keeping the border open isn't going to help. People can just walk across the border, and there could be cells all over America right now ready to attack.
And there are. As Christopher Wray has testified many times in Congress, his fear of another attack.
Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI. Why does he fear it if his FBI is part of the problem?
Because he wants to cover his rear end when it happens. Because he basically says, because the FBI is not controlling the border. So they could easily displace the blame on Customs and DHS and say, well, that's not our fault that you guys are letting those people in. They're just our problem once they get in.
I don't understand how many Americans don't see this, how an open border, and Mayorkas has already been impeached by the House. Of course, he's not going to be convicted by the Senate. He is really in charge of the border. Kamala Harris was supposedly the border czar, and they've let millions of people come across the border unvetted.
Yes.
How can anybody defend this? Why is this happening? This is madness.
I can't even tell you. That's what I'm saying. It's a confluence of factors. It's a confluence of the Marxist ideology, of globalism, of demonic activity. It's just this confluence of negativity and a deep-seated hatred for everything that's of God. And that's why I really want to bring it back to the hatred of our foundational principles, because if people get stuck in the whole Trump deranged syndrome, I think that's what's preventing Christians from acting, is that you get obsessed with the man and not the mission. Because policies, he's all that stands between the U.S. government right now and conservative Christians. And so conservative Christians need to understand our way of life is at stake. Our biblical values are at stake. Forget him as an individual. He's just a figurehead of the movement. What we really need to be concerned about is our freedoms and our way of life are at stake.
I just did a live stream. It's on our YouTube channel, ladies and gentlemen. It's called "Does Jesus Trump Your Politics?" And we deal with all these issues in terms of the difference between personality and policies, and how Jesus said, make sure that you don't neglect the more important matters of the law. I mean, if you want to see that, you can go to our YouTube channel, and we go through both party platforms on the more important matters of the law. We compare them, and then you can make your own decision. But it really seems to me that an open border is a big problem. The number one role of government, ladies and gentlemen, is to protect innocent people from evil.
Yes.
And when the government allows people to come across the border unvetted, they're not doing their job.
Absolutely.
That's what's happening right now. And you need to vote policy over personality. You need to vote mission over the man or the woman. Because those are the most important matters. I wish we had both, but we don't have both.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
we have two sort of shady characters at the top of both parties right now. And of course, Kamala Harris is the ultimate DEI candidate. She hasn't won anything. She hasn't won one vote. And yet she's running. She's going to be on the presidential ballot. You go, how does this happen?
How did it happen?
Obviously, Joe Biden did not pick her because she was the most qualified. He said when he was running for president, I'm going to pick a woman of color. That was the qualification, not that she was going to be a great president if he were to go down.
Exactly. And this is what we're stuck with.
Mm-hmm. And it's because Christians haven't been engaged enough in their government that this kind of thing happens. Do you know about half of the Christians out there, Hedieh, will not vote? Half of Christians won't vote. If all Christians voted and voted biblically, most of our political problems would be solved, but we don't vote.
Absolutely. That's the biggest threat to our democracy, I think, right now, is the inaction of Christians.
By the way, friends, go to voteyourfaith.net, voteyourfaith.net. A lot of resources up there. There's actually a digital voting program that no matter where you live in the United States, you put your address in that thing, it's going to tell you all the candidates on your ballot and where they stand. So
great.
Even, the insurance commissioner in North Carolina, I have no idea, but they know and they'll tell you conservative, liberal, where are they? You can check it out. And you can get that. It's actually the iVoter, what is it, Jorge? You know it, iVoterguide.com, something like that. Anyway, it's at voteyourfaith.net. voteyourfaith.net. All right, let's talk a little bit, if we can, Hedieh, about the unlikely bedfellows of university college campus protesters and Hamas. How does this happen?
It's really the culmination of the alliance of the left with Islam, and it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And I know most people who know anything about Islam and see Gays for Palestine just laugh hysterically out loud at the TV, because it's just the most ridiculous concept ever, considering they throw homosexuals from the rooftops in Muslim countries. But it goes back to this alliance against the people of God. So it's basically the Marxist Islamist ideology that have been aligned actually for decades. And their unified goal is the destruction of our Judeo-Christian values. And so they're not thinking about what are we going to do when we actually destroy them. They're just thinking about we're united in this destruction. And Muslims have a certain arrogance about them where they're not concerned about being aligned to these values because they know they have protection mechanisms of their own society and people. Like, they're not worried that, oh, I'm going to put my kids around these gay advocates and my child's going to turn gay. They're not afraid of that. There's an arrogance about the culture and the community that they feel that they can protect their kids from that. So the alliance is purely political, and it is expedient because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so 10 years ago, you would never have seen this kind of anti-Semitism on college campuses. It's just grown in effect and fervor since the Biden administration has empowered them by knowing that they're not going to be prosecuted. I think it actually started back in the BLM riots when they saw that Antifa and the radical left was not persecuted. They now knew that when it came to the issue of Palestine, they'd be treated the same way. They would have the room to engage in a lot of destructive behavior without any threat of harm from the central government.
But all the people who are just standing outside the Capitol on January 6th, some of them are being prosecuted. Some of them are still sitting in prison without a trial. And yet people that burned down cities during the George Floyd riots, they didn't get prosecuted. The people now that have defaced college campuses and took over departments, they're not prosecuted. In fact, the same guy, DA Alvin Bragg up there in New York, won't prosecute the Columbia students that did all those things and actually defaced property and even hurt people. But he's trying to trump up charges against Trump for some sort of accounting error with Stormy Daniels. We know that has already gone through. It's crazy how they're using the Department of Justice against conservatives, but they're laying off people who are doing far worse, who are on the left.
And this takes us back to the beginning of the last conversation. Why is this happening? It's because our law enforcement apparatus focused on the wrong threat actors, poor allocation of resources, bad staffing. And that's just a dangerous combination of destruction. They're just focused on completely the wrong thing. And as a consequence, all the truly bad actors are getting away scot-free. And it's just so demoralizing. It's demoralizing to watch. It's extremely demoralizing to people that have to live in those areas. What about all of those Jewish students who don't feel safe on campus? I didn't believe we would see this rise of anti-Semitism in our lifetimes. It's really a horrific thing to watch.
Yeah, isn't it just bizarre that I think Harvard University did a study not long ago. They found that 60% of college students thought there were justifiable reasons to kill Jews. How does this happen?
How does that happen? And I think it's just, and it's literally, it's just the influx of Islamist, brotherhood ideology, jihadist ideology, and the radical left. It's just flooding our campuses. And so between those two hate-filled doctrines, the Judeo-Christian community doesn't stand a chance if it doesn't start fighting back.
And how do we do that? Other than voting, we have to vote, but other than that?
Well, it's not just voting. I mean, have you been to a school board meeting? They're violent. It's contentious. They're difficult. It's putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations. We go to school board meetings every month, and they are contentious, and people are angry, and people are screaming. And usually, after 1 or 2 sessions, nobody wants to go back because it's a fight to death. And it's a fight for our country, and both sides know it and both sides feel it. So it's all the way from the school board to the local city council to the state and federal elections. It's also being involved in what's happening in our schools. It's being involved in what happens in our libraries, in our public libraries. You know, Kirk Cameron had a whole campaign around public libraries because he couldn't get in to do story time at the public libraries. And then Christians sit back and go, how did that happen? Well, we need to find out how we take them back.
Yeah, but drag queen story hour, he could have done that if he dressed in drag. He could have gone
exactly.
in. You know, that's just crazy. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this feeling deflated, like, how did this happen? Go home and look in the mirror, because we're the ones that have been delinquent. Freedom is never free. It always needs to be defended.
Absolutely.
And we have just gotten too fat, dumb, and happy to worry about any of this. And now this is all right at our doorstep. And we could lose our very ability to preach and live the gospel, at least legally, because we haven't been engaged enough. We haven't loved people enough to try and ensure that the right laws are put into place, the right people are put into government. We've been derelict. And we need to change that.
We have to be willing to have the hard conversations. We have to be willing to risk. I mean, the school board, the teachers union puts out videos that my husband has inappropriate feelings towards our daughter. Like, I mean, we are getting attacked regularly. It's ugly. And so you have to have thick skin. You have to have the stomach for it. You have to believe in what you're doing, and it has to be worth it. And so it's not pretty. I think another problem, I've written about this a lot on the Christian Post, is that American Christians don't have a stomach for battle. And I think that's something us formerly Muslim believers try to bring a spirit of strength and courage to the church, because this is, we're combat ready. This is the time when we need to stand up, and we have to be able to face the persecution that the Lord told us was coming and face it with strength.
Let's, I think it's quite obvious that I had a question here, but it answers itself already. What administration would be better for security? It's going to be the Trump administration, no doubt. But what are the limits of a president? Suppose President Trump does get reelected. What really can he do with regard to the so-called deep state out there?
I watched him try to conquer the deep state the first time. It's very, very difficult. It's very difficult. I don't know how much of it he's going to actually do. I mean, this time he does know the players better, but I saw members of the deep state basically lose security clearance applications, keep saying that the paperwork hasn't come through. He didn't fill a bunch of jobs to try to decrease the size of the government. And then people just ended up getting federal contracts through grants and other programs that were set up. So a lot of the big ticket items kept moving through, and then they would move through Congress because they're line items in bills. So the machinery is very, very difficult to unravel. But at least what he could do is fix the border, do some things to improve our economy, improve our law enforcement apparatus, go back in and do some house cleaning, at the highest levels, make sure the executives are following the same mission and principles, that they're looking at the right threat actors, not going after moms and Catholics. There are some big ticket items that he could hopefully influence, but to think that this is entirely curable in 4 years is impossible. Again, it does rely on the foundational communities of this country to step up. Step up and be vocal.
Well, at least he could stem the tide, apparently, of us continually going in the wrong direction. Right. Because if a Harris administration, we know what she does on the border, which is nothing, just allows people to come across. That's certainly going to continue. And they'll make a forever Democrat voting bloc by somehow getting all these illegal aliens to vote at some point.
Yes.
That's a state by state issue. And if states just want to sign people up to vote, who's going to stop them?
Exactly.
This is you have who's been given actual, was it California, New York? One of those two states is talking about giving money to illegal aliens to build homes. Yes. I mean, they're getting benefits and they haven't paid anything into the system. Meanwhile, people who have paid into the system aren't getting those benefits. I mean, this is just unfair on its face, to say nothing of it.
And then you say to people, why are you angry? And then when people riot and protest like they're doing in Europe for the exact same thing, they're just ahead of us. Then they say, you're violent. You're a threat to society because you're angry. Why are you angry? Yeah. Well, because we paid into this system and we don't get the benefits. You're giving the benefits to somebody else. It's like having a child and saying, I'm going to send the neighbor's kid to college instead of you. I mean, how's your kid going to react?
Yeah, exactly. All right, hold the thought for a second, Hedieh. I want to point out that tonight, the 24th, will be at McNeese State University. Check us out online. You can see us. We're in Lake Charles, Louisiana. If you're near there, anyone can come. The next day we'll be at Little Cypress Mauriceville High School. We'll also put that up on the live stream. That is actually in Orange, Texas. And then the next night, Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. Again, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Plenty of time for Q&A. All will be live streamed. Check it out. The following week, October 1st, we'll be at Rock Point Church. And as I mentioned in the last podcast, one of the biggest differences between Islam and Christianity is the resurrection. Well, Dr. Mike Licona and I have put together a brand new course on the resurrection. It starts in October. If you take the premium version, you are going to be live with Mike and or me for live Q&A Zoom sessions. The program or the course is called Did Jesus Rise from the Dead? Evidence and Objections for the Modern Mind. Go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. You will see it there. For the live events, go to crossexamine.org, click on events, Frank Turek calendar. You'll see it there. Hedieh, let's talk a little bit about how you became a Muslim and then how you became a Christian. We haven't talked about that yet. How did you become a Muslim, first of all?
Well, it was in college. I just found that I needed a relationship with God. I felt like I had everything in the world and I wasn't happy. And I thought it really felt like a yearning for God. And I thought I'd become Jewish. I was in love with a Jewish boy at first, and his family was like, absolutely not. You're a Muslim. And then I was shocked to hear that I was identified as a Muslim. And so when I talked to my father, he's like, yeah, well, that's the religion of your ancestors. So you might as well investigate that first. And literally that's how I landed there. And the first community I came about, as we talked about, it was an extremist mosque. I wanted nothing to do with that. And then I met the mystics, the Sufis. And that's where I ended up.
Now, what percentage of Muslims are Sufis? It's pretty small. Is it not small?
It's about, if you ask the Sufis, they say it's about 20% because it's basically part of the cultural practices of the religion wherever it's founded in the Middle East and Asia, and especially Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, is predominantly Sufi. Okay,
so they're a lot
and India
less interested in violent jihad than, say, the Shia are, or even the Sunnis.
Yes,
correct.
They're not interested. The only jihad they're interested in is self-purification, as it is known, is the internal jihad.
Okay. Before we go to how you became a Christian, I do want to ask you about something going back to Iraq, because I heard you talk to Jack about this, the Jack Hibbs podcast. We tried to come into Iraq after we kicked Saddam out and tried to reorganize it. And we fired 300,000, I think you called them
Baathists.
Sunnis. Why do they call them Baath, number one? And then they turned into a very notorious terrorist group. Explain that, would you?
Sure. So the ruling party of Saddam Hussein was called the Baathists. They were Baathists. And they were a minority group of Sunnis that controlled a predominantly Shia population. So the U.S. intelligence foreign policy apparatus decided we are going to throw out the 300,000 ruling party of Sunnis and bring in the Shia. And as a consequence, they will love us. They're open-minded. Their religion is a lot less dogmatic. We're going to build democracy in Iraq. And I told a lot of these experts, Iran is next door. What are you talking about? They're Shia and they're extreme. And he says, well, no, they fought a very long civil war together. They had a 10-year civil war. They hate each other. The Iranians and the Iraqis are never going to align. And so day one, we basically fired and imprisoned, for the most part, anybody that was involved in Saddam Hussein's regime. And those that we didn't imprison scattered and formed the basis of ISIS that we're still struggling with today. It was literally, I think, one of the worst foreign policy disasters of our existence.
So the Baathists became ISIS, essentially.
Yes, because they were technocrats, military officials, military strategists. They had a very good functioning government. These were the elite of society. They had good jobs, good education. They were running the country, and then they became a terrorist organization. So they were pretty competent as a result.
Well,
and we left all of our equipment. So that's not the first time we've left equipment. I know President Trump likes to make jokes about how we left all this equipment in Afghanistan, but that's not the first time. We always leave the equipment.
The equipment.
They were running around in our uniforms and our tanks.
Tell us about what has happened in Afghanistan. The debacle of the Biden administration is well known, although the media won't talk about it. But there has been an upside of our time in Afghanistan. What is that?
Yes, Afghanistan, the blood, sweat, and tears that the American people had spent in Afghanistan was tremendous. It was the loss of life that we incurred, the difficulty. It is such a difficult country to work in. I mean, I had my staff there for a while doing a report for a private foundation, trying to understand where the traditional groups were, where the mainstream groups were, and they almost got arrested. It was a very difficult place to operate. And then at the end of it, the culmination of all this blood, sweat, and tears, we have this ridiculous debacle of an evacuation. We leave no military personnel. We leave all billions of dollars of equipment. And for a lot of us, the most tragic part is the women and children, the people that were left behind, and all of the persecution that would occur as a result of them getting left behind once again and let down by a Western power. But I had a wonderful conversation with an aid worker there the other day who was telling me, as sad and depressing it was, the gospel flourished in Afghanistan. So before this 20 years, there was just a minimal Christian population in Afghanistan, not even registered in the numbers. And after the U.S. invasion and after 20 years of being there, there was a very sizable, in the thousands, population of Afghanistan that is still prospering and that is still growing until today. So it's heartwarming, at least, that even in the most difficult of circumstances, the gospel seeds are planted and people have the opportunity to believe in Christ and to achieve salvation, most importantly.
Is the Taliban trying to stamp them out, do you think, or are they kind of below the radar? Yeah.
No, absolutely. There's apparently people are being persecuted, imprisoned for just having Bible apps on their phone. That's how they find out that they're Christians. But they're still reaching out overseas. There's a lot of broadcasts that go into Afghanistan in Dari and Farsi and Urdu, the other languages that the other minority tribes listen to and follow. So it's continuing to spread and to grow. Wait,
you're saying the religion of peace isn't so peaceful when it comes to Christianity, huh? Okay, got it.
Not so peaceful.
How about some positive developments in Iran? What do you know about that?
Oh, it's my favorite. It's my favorite just to hear. It's the fastest growing church in the world. I've heard the most amazing stories of fellow Persians who have met Christ in a similar fashion to me. I audibly heard the voice of Christ, but they have dreams, they have visions, they hear his voice in the most extraordinary, supernatural ways. They are encountering Christ on a regular basis. There's an entire network, many networks of underground churches. I have friends who do discipling. They basically bring the underground church over to Turkey. teach them how to spread the gospel, basically teaching them how to disciple people one-on-one and then sending them back into the country. It's just a tremendous effort.
I was in Iran in 2006, Noah's Ark expedition, beautiful country. We loved the people when we were there.
Oh.
It's good to see that there's some inroads for the gospel. I think a lot of people probably over there are just fed up with the Sharia law Muslims over there who are just making life miserable for them.
That's the silver lining of an oppressive Islamic regime, is the freedom that Christ provides is such a welcome change. And
it was a welcome change for you. How did you become a Christian? What happened? I know you heard a preacher online, but what was it that put you over the top and you said, I'm a Christian now?
It was, so I left Islam before I met Christ. So I left Islam because I was told I was going to spend an eternity in hellfire for taking off my headscarf. And I just thought that I'm so tired of worshiping this very angry, mean, penalizing God, and I can't worship a God that's going to put me in hellfire for a piece of fabric. So I left Islam, moved to Southern California, left DC, and it was just clicking on a social media post of a girl who says that my pastor changed my life. And I was like, okay, well, let's hear what that's all about. I knew nothing about salvation. Nobody had witnessed to me. I had dozens of Christian pastors and bishops and friends that were doing interfaith work with me in DC and around the world. Nobody ever told me that Jesus saves. And yeah, it just hearing the message of the simple gospel was so transformative to me. Still, I was terrified. I prayed regularly. I was in sajda with my head on the ground in traditional Islamic prayer, and just kept asking God to reveal himself for me. And I just said, well, if the God of Jesus is real, then show me. And then I heard the voice of Christ tell me, Hedieh, it's me. And
when was that, Hedieh? 2020? What year was that?
No, 2018.
2018. You literally heard an audible voice from the Lord.
Yes.
This is not uncommon among Muslims.
Exactly.
Dreams, visions, Jesus appearing. And that was it. How did your family react?
My family, I have a very close relationship with my father. And can I tell a little story about my father?
Go. Yeah.
So
please.
My father and I were very close. He was very sweet. He's like, do whatever you want, whatever makes you happy. I had such a difficult road in Islam that he was just pleased to know I was happy. He passed away, unfortunately, a couple years ago. And I've been trying, I witnessed to him tremendously in his last year of life. And at his moment of passing, I didn't know whether he had accepted the gospel or not. And the Lord just gave me peace in my heart to know that, this is done. You've done what you could do, and this is in my hands. And now I'm working on my mom. My mom is still alive. And I hear that my mom has a dream that my father is telling her to read the Green Book, that she has to read the Green Book. And the Green Book is a Farsi Bible that I left in her house.
Good.
And he told her, and he told the housekeeper in the dream, you have to make her read the Green Book. So it was just, so the Lord is even reaching out to my family, touching my mom. The only person my mom would ever listen to is my father. And so I'm just blessed to know that that's continuing, and that the power that Jesus is still on the throne. He's still performing supernatural miracles. He's still impacting us in ways in which we couldn't imagine. And I'm just so grateful and blessed to be a member of the kingdom.
Wonderful. How about your brother and the rest of your extended family? How have they reacted?
Nobody else speaks to me.
They don't?
No. We lost
You're dead to them.
Else. Unfortunately, the hardest part has been for my daughter. She lost everyone. So she lost her father and his whole side of the family.
Okay, so they won't talk to her because she's being brought up in a Christian home.
And she's Christian. Yes, she accepted the Lord.
Okay. This is, as you know, friends, this is a kind of a doctrine of Islam. Surah 3 talks about this, that someone leaves Islam, that's it. Could even result in
death,
honor killing. We pray, of course, it doesn't come to that, but that's what Surah 3 says. It's common in cults. It's common in Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. You're disfellowshipped if you leave. it's got to be hard to deal with. Maybe not so much for you, Hedieh, but for your daughter.
Yes. It's been a bumpy road.
Well, just keep praying. Meanwhile, you're doing great work. You're such a wealth of great insights. I wish people were as level-headed in our government as you are.
They used to be. I mean, me and all my colleagues, we didn't care about what political party we belonged to. We cared about doing good for the country. And, I don't know when this train fell off the tracks so badly, but the only thing I can point to is just the hatred and the animosity for Trump and what he stands for. It caused this dramatic shift, and now it's just come to light how much they hate the roots of this country, and it just gets worse and worse. And it's our fight.
Well, Satan will attack the Christian worldview.
Yes,
that's what's going on. Notice he's not going after the Hindus or the Buddhists, right? He's going after the Christians.
Exactly.
So, ladies and gentlemen, buckle up. Jesus said it would be that way. He said, if they persecuted me, they're going to persecute you. Paul said, anyone who lives a faithful life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. But take heart. Jesus said, I've overcome the world.
Amen.
He also said, you're blessed when you're insulted on account of me. Think about that. You're blessed.
To live is Christ, to die is gain.
That's right. So take it from a former Muslim, ladies and gentlemen. She knows that better than we do. For those of us that haven't been Muslims. So tell more about your ministry, where they can go to learn more, Hedieh. If they want to contact you, where do they go?
So resurrectministry.com. My socials are on there. My socials is under my maiden name, Hedieh Mirahmadi. It's my Instagram. And then I do a podcast with my husband called the Living Fearless Devotional. Living Fearless. And if you look up my name, you'll find it. We're on the Real Life Network with Pastor Jack Hibbs, and we just do a devotional about, we choose a passage of scripture and we talk about current events in our life. My husband's a former police officer, so we talk a lot about law enforcement and politics and raising a blended family of 6 kids.
That is fabulous. And so friends, Hedieh is spelled Hedieh, and then Mirahmadi is Mirahmadi. Look her up. Or you can go to the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. We'll have all of the links in the show notes. Hedieh, you're a blessing. Thanks for spending 2 shows with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And just give one final charge to our listeners. What would you ask them to do besides pray? And go ahead.
I've got a lot of things. Not only do every single Christian has to vote, but become more active. Let people know your faith and what you believe. Represent your biblical values to your neighbors, to your friends, to your community. Write a blog post, post it on the internet, post it on your social media, the importance of standing up for our values. This is our fight to lose, folks. We're in the battle to death, and our values are at stake in this country. And so vote your values and represent Christ in everything that you do.
Excellent. And check out, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, friends, the Does Jesus Trump Your Politics on our YouTube channel. I know that there's a lot of distaste for the candidates at the top of the ticket, but remember, you're not voting for one person. You're voting for 5,000 people to go to Washington and implement an agenda, implement a platform, implement a set of policies. It's not one person. In fact, Hedieh is an example of that. She's part of different administrations. You're sending a whole bunch of people to Washington to put forth those values, put forth those policies. So look at the policies as we do in the Does Jesus Trump Your Politics live stream, and then follow what the more important matters of the law are on those policies. Thank you so much, Hedieh.
Thank you.
All right, friends, Lord willing, we'll see you here next week. God bless.